To begin this brief history of modern painting, I would like to start off by mentioning just why it is important to do so. Despite not being an admirer of his work, Virgil Abloh, founder of streetwear brand Off-White and later the creative director of Louis Vuitton, had this to say on the subject.
And this is like a photo that not really, it's not that important, but it's impactful to me because the whole like Instagram, everyone's creative. Peter Saville, my mentor, the guy that did all those like Joy Division album covers, told me, he's like super mentor of mine and was like, he's like, why your generation has this like feeling of angst, like why you're sort of like super norm, a little bit over it, but you're excited to be in it. He was like, in my time, which he, just predates me by like 20, 30 years, was like, when we were in London, like he, communication, graphic design, meets a band called Joy Division. They didn't even have anyone to do an album cover. And they're just like, hey, we know how to use these like things at school, like, and it was basically just that waveform was just a reference that he had, and just like gave it to like photocopied it and was like, here, and it's like a super important album packaging of their time and our time. He was basically like, back then there was like 3 of us, like on the same street. It was like no one was interested in that, and like look at all of us, like we can fill a room of we're on the same path. So it's like, that's where that feeling of like oversaturation is, but it shouldn't be discouraging. It's like we have a bigger community is the way that I see it. But just having a knowledge of what these different periods in art are can help you give understanding to what you're doing and why you arrive at these ideas, that they come, like the world evolved in this sort of way. That sort of like gave me a bit of context, so I was not like sort of fighting to be so different. It's just sort of owning my own voice in this like sea of differentness, and everyone sort of like trying to make a mark. So yeah, the Renaissance, that's how I kicked off this wave. And I always bring this up in talks because you can never predict like what first project is going to like lead to your like dream job or career goals. And this was my domino effect. I was just really into Caravaggio, like to the point where me as a creative person didn't realize you could invent. And that's what, this painting represents to me. It's, honestly, I just put this up here to have it up at Harvard and someday.
So, when involving yourself in modern works of art, regardless of whether or not they are accepted into the canon of the art world, being literate in the works of the European masters can lay a foundation by which to draw inspiration for your own art, whether it be literature, beat making, or simple meme drawing. To frame this, I would like to begin with this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, taken from his essay titled History in 1841. The quote draws light to the fact that much like ourselves, by the nature of language, we only know who we are, in many ways, in relation only to the words we have been taught to express ourselves through, words that rely not only of our own understanding of them, but of what others agree upon as what they understand those words to mean. In the case of history, there is properly none available of it. Much like the character of Jesus in the Bible, we know that he may have existed, but even that is up for debate. All we truly know of him are the 4 biographies written by him by the 4 evangelists. In this way, Jesus, or even King George III, and by nature the identity of people as Christians or Americans, rely on what a subjective historian's biography of said person he claimed was history. It is for this reason, as I will come to show, that history painting, once the most prized of all painting practices, came to be replaced by what today we consider modern art, but in the process the nature of biography remained the same. For this reason, amongst others, some art historians, as I will choose to do today, claim the foundation of what we consider today modern art to begin with this painting, The Death of Marat, by French painter Jacques-Louis David. Born and necessitated by the French Revolution, within this visual biography of European history do we see the foundation of modern art, and by that virtue, the definitions of freedom still to come. Marat, the man in the painting being killed, belonged to the political party of the Montagnards, enemies of the Girondin political faction. Marat was killed by Charlotte Corday, part of said enemy Girondin faction, who Marat believed came to visit him in hopes of shedding her alliance with the Girondins in favor of Marat and the rest of the French Revolution. A Judas-type figure, David, the painter, and an ally to the revolution himself, decided to immortalize this moment by ushering in modern art as we know it. David the painter, himself a Jacobin, was part of the lawyers that devised and laid the way for the French ideal of liberté to later be exported as a global value, having voted for the death of the French king himself. This, of course, however, must not overlook what Luke said of Christ's attitudes toward lawyers in the New Testament. Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them." At the time, women were still not allowed to weigh in on the matters of Jacobean dialogues. They were only permitted to listen in from the balconies as they controlled the biography of men from history's background. So heavy was this new foundation and cry for liberty by the French that they decided it would need a new man and a new calendar. While never adopted over the Gregorian calendar, the revolutionists believed so righteously in the revolution that they declared the year of its commencement the New Year Zero. In turn with the necessity of a new calendar, so too would David hope to paint a new man in accordance with the speed and the values of the French Revolution. Pictured here is an illustration made by David in the image of previous history paintings commissioned by French nobility. Notice the shape of the bodies, the voluptuous and highly muscularized forms by which the French, and therefore the European man, is mythologized through what the French and Europe considers to be the Western ideals of masculinity laid out by the Greeks and the Romans. Their bodies are not simply masculine, they are the masculine ideal, one removed from truth that only through the power of the subjectivity of history, through biography, hoped to make mythology out of men. It is out of the act of making mythology of men that Western art was formed. Seen here is not the male body as we would like to take it, but a biography of it, a form made in what the West would consider its highest image, the Greek and Roman ideal. Muscles are made into ornament by lighting and painting techniques that turn ligaments on skin into X-rays of them in portraiture. The red of the blanket beneath the man is as fanciful and as much of decor as the man's muscles themselves in this depiction, the coarseness or weight of the fabric made in the image of the muscles that David was instructed to make immortal. Form, not the body itself, was more important in writing history through painting than the subjectivity of the artist's reality. The necessity for biography continues into the modern day as evidenced by the images of figures such as Alexander Hamilton and the rest of the American founding fathers, and the American iconography on American currency. What gives these bills value, can then be said, is not simply the bonds paid back to create them, to make sure they never lose the exchange currency they are biographies of, but rather the value assigned to this cloth biography of Alexander Hamilton, in turn, has value assigned to it in relation not just to consumer goods, but the cultural value of the visual cloth biographies of men like Marat themselves. These dead presidents, as rappers so often ennoble them, represent more than simply wealth in this instance. They represent the weight of a nation's past, present, and future. Was it the vision of a man like Hamilton that ended up giving his cloth depiction of him this value? Or is it our collective effort between the state and its civilians that continues to make the idea of the bill more valuable than the cloth it is printed on today? For it is through this image, and what we make of the biography of him on American currency, as a founding father made in the light of the French Statue of Liberty, or as simply a white supremacist, that the identities of Americans are destined to be sealed in the coming decades. Who is to say what gives Alexander Hamilton his value? The fact that we can verify the bills printed with his face on it through the watermark of him on them, or the fact that, in labeling him a white supremacist, we see him and his image as more important and powerful than our collective histories and identities in the process. Painted by Caravaggio from 1603 to 1604, the biography he made of Italian common people contemporary in his time in relation to the biblical Gospels continued to haunt the West until this day. At the time radical ventures, Caravaggio's signature techniques and continued cultural and historical relevance make it so reproductions of this biography of Jesus can be worth hundreds or thousands of visual biographies of dead presidents. In it, we can come to see the mastery of Caravaggio's own biographies and elucidate what Nietzsche had to say on the nature of philosophy as a whole. Much like Ovid's Patroclus, the men and women of Caravaggio's The Entombment of Christ are almost life-size giants, the man holding Jesus having feet and arms so full and heavy in tone, even Jesus himself could weigh multiple men rather than the frailty of an Italian common man. Featuring Caravaggio's signature lighting technique, the man holding Jesus has had his elbow depicted in intense lighting to make it almost pop out of the painting itself. The many stages of grief can be depicted in the faces of the women and men holding him. Follow the circular arc of the hands and people depicted here, from top right to Jesus' face, and we see at once the wonder of Caravaggio's visual storytelling and self-biography at play. The many bodies and faces form together into one set of motions depicting different reactions to Jesus' entombment, as the legs of the man in the front come to stand in for the legs of the woman in the back as well. The nun's hand does the same, creating a visual metaphor for the many emotions and stages of grief all humankind passes through before death, as each emotion is not only set in biography by Caravaggio's portraiture of the person, but because he could only express said emotions through the bodies and characters he chose to express them. The grief of a nun, after all, is different than the grief of a peasant woman, and the scream of a peasant woman is never the same as the care, shock, and reverence of a man holding his friend as he is being entombed. This fulfills the requirement of Nietzsche's assertion about what it meant to be a philosopher. Quote, they all pose as though their real opinions have been discovered and attained through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic, in contrast to all sorts of mystics who, fairer and foolisher, talk of inspiration. Whereas, in fact, a prejudiced proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstraction, and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought out after the event. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy up till now has consisted of, namely, the confession of its originator and a series of involuntary and unconscious autobiography, and moreover that the moral, or immoral, purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital germ out of which the entire plant has always grown. In the philosopher, on the contrary, there is absolutely nothing impersonal, and above all, his morality furnishes a decided and decisive testimony as to who he is, that is to say, in what order the deepest impulses of his nature stand to each other. There is no truth in Caravaggio's Entombment of Christ, simply the false truths and series of confessions about what Caravaggio's vision allowed him to decide to depict about what aspects of himself he saw in the people and emotions he hoped to depict. It is an autobiography of the highest form. It is for the same reason that David decided to paint Marat, to give a biography of what he saw it fit and as necessary to break free from the church and give freedom to a people through the prejudice of history. Rather than draw Marat in a Greek form, Marat is depicted somewhat sickly. He is pictured in his humanity, not in his immortality, by drawing his body as less muscular, less like a homunculus, as men were depicted before during the age of Caravaggio. In doing so, David does not draw Marat, he draws himself, the impulses and what he considers to be his nature in relation to the values of portraiture at the time. He does not paint Marat, he paints the necessity of breaking free from the church and the mythology it had created for Jesus for the masses, through the simplicity and meekness of Marat's outstanding revolutionary spirit through his sickly body. A sickly man, Marat often took baths to quell the hives that would break out due to his chronic illness. Biography, in its necessity, is at the heart of what was then and now is considered history painting. Paintings such as these were not simply displayed in French salons and galleries for the pleasure of the oligarchs of France. They were meant to be displayed publicly as well, in the name of conveying the mythology of history to the public. Much like the symbolism of the Alexander Hamilton note, the sanctity of a nation can be summarized in an image. David, in this instance, was commissioned by the French government, a government which he eventually rebelled against and voted to destroy, to paint a Roman myth regarding two sets of brothers, the Herati brothers from Rome and the Curiati brothers from Alba. Rather than go to war against one another, each of the cities sent three brothers from each family to decide the fate of either city, Curiati or Horati. The three Roman brothers, shown on the leftmost side of the painting, take up arms against their three sisters, tied together between them by their father in between. Only one of the Herati brothers survives. After his two siblings are murdered, he leads away the Curiati brothers from Alba and slays them one by one. On returning home, the surviving brother sees his sister crying. She had been betrothed to one of the three Curiati brothers slain. In the picture, it is the sister seen crying while sitting down. She wept before the battle, knowing she was destined to lose one of her loved ones in the process, either her betrothed or her brother. Upon seeing this, the remaining Haradi brother slays his sister, depicting his ultimate sacrifice to his civic pride, and in turn, what would later constitute the foundation of Western values in the process. Memorialized through David's artwork and commissioned by the French government to emphasize the need for the French identity over lustful romances and interpersonal identities, David, in the name of France, would vote to kill the king 9 years later during the French Revolution. It is the same necessity of biography that has endured in the West through popular symbols such as Alex Ross's depiction of Superman in the late 1990s. Much like the three-color clothing of the men and women in Oath of the Haredi, so too is simple contrast and contour used by Ross to eternalize contemporary American popular values through Superman, albeit this time through capitalism and popular culture, rather than the whims of a state. This process of a nation's civic identity was, after the creation of Superman, but before his reimagining by Ross, depicted by Andy Warhol in 1962 through his now infamous Campbell soup cans. Lacking the grandiosity of the Oath of the Haredi, Andy's paintings reflect the mass consumption and, in turn, the biography of the American people, not through high art, but through the process of turning the manufacturing line into an art making process, highlighting the ability for anyone in middle class America, regardless of origin, to buy the cans. The images speak to the totality of the American identity, which allows for fame to be dispersed through mass consumption. In turn, taking an everyday object and allowing anyone who then buys a Campbell soup can to go into a celebrity's home and say, I have one of those in my house too. Democratizing the sensation of fame, Warhol's work depicts the American's private identity being sacrificed for his consumer one, as the American capitalist consumption patterns and the economic system they are based upon form the civic sacrifice that the Haradi brothers laid down their lives for. In turn, David was sent to render Marat whole, turn him into a celebrity by reminding us of his status not as a homunculus, but as a man of his own accord, giving him eternal life in the process. Taking inspiration from Michelangelo's Pieta, Marat has drawn like Christ, giving him the religious iconography of Christ's body, but at the same time, Marat has his mythological form taken away from him. He is as eternalized as Jesus, but forever trapped to the mortality Marat wished to give him, in turn creating a new man, made in the image of man, and his worldly mortality in the process. American commentators today wish for something of the same, looking for a reassurance of their identity and morality through a new biography of the American and to a larger extent Western man. Identifying with past masculine descriptions and seeing that younger women are simply rejecting the contemporary male figures young men are identifying with, men like Joe Rogan are looking for media to reflect the masculine ideals they want their children, and by that virtue, the next generation of American men to uphold. So called feminists decry this kind of masculinity, the type pictured here by Frank Frazetta, despite themselves believing in it. The only difference between Frazetta and the feminists who believe this depiction of masculinity is inherently immoral is that Frazetta chooses to depict it through illustration, but the remnants of this masculinity are upheld and live in the subconscious of all so-called feminists who fear it. This means that in the case of Marat, Marat is returned whole, not simply through David's gaze, but through the gaze of the artists and painters that came before him. The jutting out of the elbow that creates an invitation into the painting through Jesus' chest on the right side is not recreated in Marat's work. Marat, through David's brush, is not granted the holy light of resurrection through artistry. Instead, Marat is kept dead, a symbol of martyrdom in the secular sense, so that unlike Jesus' death, he may simply be seen as a human martyr, not a divine one, ushering in the French Revolution and modern painting in a single stroke. Rather than have a man die for the sins of all men, Marat dies for the sins of a revolution, eternalizing him in his mortality and single place in history rather than religious eternity. Instead, we get this image, one that, much like Jesus' contour in Caravaggio's work, has Marat and his linens blend together, the pure greens and light whites of linen tapestry serving as a point of harmony for the work's composition. His body is reflected and drapes out in beauty through the simplicity of the linen, a further example of how David chose to make Marat, unlike the previous legacy of Western painting, a man light in weight and more human to the eye and stature. The contour previously mentioned to make him reflect Jesus in his mother's arms rears its head once more as we are reminded of Jesus as the world's eternal martyr, this time not through the mythology of him conveyed and upholding the supremacy of the church and state, but in its complete rejection of it. The final item in question, the one that draws us into the work and is more visible in person, is the note he holds in his hand during his moments of death. Written by his assassin, Charlotte Corday, it reads July 13th, 1793. Marie Anne Charlotte Corday to Citizen Marat. It is enough that I am very unhappy to be entitled to your benevolence. Enacting revenge on him on behalf of the crown, there were no spectators, no mythological servants of God to capture, as Caravaggio did in Jesus' Entombment, Marat's final moments. Instead, all that is left on the table in front of Marat's bath is a bill to represent the French court, which abstracted through paper bills land into money. At the same time that the French Revolution was taking place, so too were French painters immortalizing the struggle of African men looking to free themselves from French colonial rule. While that struggle continues until this day, as the descendants of Haitian slaves have still yet to be granted access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in their own country, it was this man of Senegalese origin, Jean Baptiste Bellay, who in 1791, alongside his comrade Saint Dominique, incited the French Revolution through slave rebellions in said island. A symbol of freedom for all men, he was the first fully black man in the French National Convention, helping to outlaw slavery alongside Frenchmen in France in 1794. Despite his efforts, the slave-owning generals of the Caribbean fought against this ruling. He died in a French prison, having never fully seen his vision, only allowed to be eternalized in portraiture when upheld against the white French abolitionist Guillaume Reynaud. The question here is not one of otherness, as art historians may want you to believe, but rather that of who is considered French enough to be declared as being entitled to be immortalized as a symbol of liberty. For it was not Belay that was simply an extension of Reynaud's values, but of all men, regardless of origin, as a whole.